This video describes the American Civil War, one of the bloodiest and most decisive conflicts in American history. This war, which lasted from 1861 to 1865, was fought between the northern and southern states of the United States and led to deep divisions over issues such as slavery, states' rights, and Western expansion. The origins of war date back to the founding years of America. While the northern states were industrializing, the southern states had a structure based on agricultural economy and slave labor. This difference caused constant tension over the future of slavery and American expansion. In our video, we will give information about the causes, wars, and consequences of the American Civil War. By the mid-19th century, an economy based on agriculture, dominated by large farms, had settled in the southeastern regions of the United States. In these farms, especially cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane were grown, and the necessary labor was provided by slaves of black origin who were kidnapped from Africa. In other parts of the United States, the economy turned towards industry, and slavery was abolished to make way for the free labor force that this required. New states were still being established in the western part of the USA, and slavery was banned in most of these new states. In this environment, southern states were worried that slavery would eventually be banned in the South as well. This fundamentally threatened the South's mode of production, which was based on slavery. When presidential candidate Abraham Lincoln, who ran for office promising to abolish slavery, won the election, 7 southern states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Texas, Georgia, and Louisiana, immediately declared their independence from the USA, assuming that the new president would abolish slavery. These states formed a new state called the Confederate States of America, under the presidency of Jefferson Davis. Shortly thereafter, 4 more states, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, joined. These 11 states formed the Southern Confederate side in the American Civil War. The rest of the country, especially the northeastern part, also formed the Union or the North side of the Union. After a while, war broke out between the two states. Battle of Fort Sumter, April 12, 1861, was the battle that resulted in the start of the American Civil War, when anti-Union troops bombarded Fort Sumter near Charleston, South Carolina, and captured the area. Following declarations of secession from the Union by 7 southern states, these states demanded that the Union Army in South Carolina abandon its facilities at Charleston Harbor. On December 26, 1860, Major Robert Anderson secretly captured Sullivan's Island, an important fort at the entrance to Fort Sumter. In order to prevent an attack on the shore on January 9, 1861, U.S. President James Buchanan's attempt to supply batteries to the island failed. South Carolina authorities then overthrew federal rule in the Charleston area, except for Fort Sumter. During the early months of 1861, the situation around Fort Sumter began to increasingly resemble a siege. In March, Brigadier General Beauregard was placed in command of Confederate forces in Charleston as the first general of the newly formed Confederate States Army. Beauregard first ordered the reinforcement of the batteries around the harbor in Charleston opposite Fort Sumter. Union soldiers made great efforts to fortify the batteries on the island, but conditions for the fort became terribly difficult due to the siege. Fort Sumter Unit Commander Anderson had enough soldiers and supplies for a very short time. The Fort Sumter supply was the first crisis of the administration of newly elected U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. His initiative resulted in an ultimatum from the Confederate government. South Carolina Governor Francis W. Pickens sent word to the fort requesting that Fort Sumter be evacuated immediately. Major Anderson refused to surrender. At 04:30 on April 12th, Confederate artillery batteries around the harbor began bombarding the fort. Although the Union garrison fought back, a significant amount of the battery was out of action, and after 34 hours, Major Anderson agreed to evacuate the fort. Although gunfire during surrender ceremonies on April 14th killed one Union soldier, there were no casualties on either side, given that the gunfire was not a direct military target. After the war, participation in military units increased in the North and South. With his emergency call, Lincoln summoned 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. Meanwhile, 4 more states joined the Confederacy. The Civil War had begun. Battle of Antietam, the Battle of Sharpsburg, known in the South, was one of the most important battles of the American Civil War, fought near Sharpsburg, Maryland, on September 17, 1862. The battle was fought around the stream known as Antietam Creek and the town of Sharpsburg in Maryland, which remained a part of the United States despite allowing slavery. The battle was the bloodiest day in United States history. The total losses of the 2 combatant sides were around 23,000. Union Army Major General George B. McClellan followed the Confederate Army under the command of General Robert E. Lee to Maryland and launched an attack. As a result, Lee's army took a defensive position west of Antietam Creek and north and east of the town of Sharpsburg. The battle, which lasted approximately 12 hours uninterrupted, ended on the evening of September 17, 1862, without any side gaining a clear and overwhelming tactical superiority. On September 18, 1862, both sides made a temporary ceasefire to deal with the dead and wounded, and the day ended without conflict. General Robert E. Lee withdrew his army and returned to Virginia on the evening of September 18, 1862. It is accepted that the United States Army, which remained on the battlefield, won the battle. Battle of Gettysburg. This battle is one of the most important battles that took place during the American Civil War and changed the course of the war. The battle, which lasted 3 days, occurred near the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Confederate Army under General Robert E. Lee faced the Union Army under General George G. Meade. The first day of battle was successful for the Confederate forces, forcing the Union forces to retreat toward the high ground west of the town. On the second day, Confederate forces attacked Union positions, but were unsuccessful. On the third day, General Lee's famous Pickett's Charge infantry attack also failed, inflicting heavy casualties. The failure of this attack led to the withdrawal of Confederate forces. The Battle of Gettysburg went down in history as one of the bloodiest battles of the American Civil War. An estimated 50,000 soldiers were recorded as dead or wounded. Following the battle, on November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his famous Gettysburg Address at a memorial service at the Gettysburg battlefield. This speech is considered one of the most important and influential speeches in American history. Although this speech, delivered at a commemoration ceremony following the Battle of Gettysburg, was quite short, Lincoln successfully expressed the core values of American democracy and the meaning and purpose of the Civil War in the span of approximately 2 minutes. Finally, on April 9, 1865, the Northern Army surrounded the armies of the famous Southern commander Robert Edward Lee from several arms and forced them to surrender. In June of the same year, all remaining Southern soldiers laid down their weapons and surrendered, and the American Civil War ended with the victory of the North. As the war approached its end, Northern President Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed by a Southerner. At the end of the war, all slaves in the South were granted freedom and soon gained the right to vote. The agricultural economy based on slavery in the southern United States came to an end. The United States of America overcame the danger of division and became united again as a single country. Although blacks in the South were given many rights at the end of the war, these were soon taken back by Southern whites. In addition, while the southern and northern sides of the USA were equally wealthy before the war, after the war the South suffered economic destruction, and the North took the lead. During the war, the media's on-site coverage of the battles resulted in increased salaries of journalists, increased newspaper subscription fees, and thus strengthened the media's position in the United States. Abraham Lincoln, the first president who constantly made statements to the media, carried out public relations activities, and made propaganda, became a role model for subsequent presidents in this field. If you like our video, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and support us by turning on notifications.